I'm Joanna Pierre-Neves, your host, and this is Exhibitionistas. I'm an independent writer and curator with a wide-ranging 2-decade career in contemporary art, from commercial galleries to art fairs, from research to curating, from Lisbon to London, through Paris. But when I'm asked what I do outside the art world, the inevitable reaction is, oh, I don't know anything about contemporary art. Ouch. So call it a midlife crisis, call it arrogance, but I gave myself the task of trying to fill that gap with co-host conversation episodes centered around a genuine exchange of thoughts, feelings, and precious context around solo exhibitions, interviews, and special episodes based on a particular topic to keep you alert and on your toes. If you want to read further into some of the topics discussed in the episodes and more, you can also find me on Substack under my name, Joanna Pierre-Neves. Consider this episode as a surprise. I like to work on smaller episodes when a topic feels right, and today is one of those days. Recently, I was invited to talk about paper in a seminar at ABK Stuttgart, a fine art university in Germany. It was an inaugural speech, so I wanted to do something different, perhaps a bit more performative. I've lived with paper for so many years, being married to an artist who uses it like a flat body, folding it, bending it, dabbing it with cement and graphite, adjusting his strength to the fragility of its slightly grainy material. Paper is what we write on, but I do prefer to write on a keyboard looking at a screen. This back and forth between screens and sheets made me think of the German artist Irma Blank. I co-curated her touring exhibition with my friend and colleague Joanna Carrier, which led us to spend time with the artist in Milan, interviewing her, finding out more and more about her and the works she had hardly shown during her lifetime, as well as those she was known for, at least in her hometown. Blank passed away on the 14th of April 2023, so this episode is a homage to someone who came close to being a mentor, a notion she would have abhorred as much as I do. Imagine, in the early 1960s, a German woman struggling to find her words in Italian. She's young, she's in Sicily, and she's starting a new life with her mathematician lover. She's an artist who is as well read as she is obsessed with art making. Little by little, the Italian language sinks in. She starts mastering it, and communication expands beyond the home, into the city, the shops, the beaches. She becomes bilingual and thus bicultural. But it's a two-way street. She speaks and she's spoken to. There is finally communication. She verbalizes her thoughts and others respond. She welcomes another world into the world she built at home. Home, city, island, country, language, culture, people. Then starts another process much deeper and more unsettling. She finds out that there is a world of learned words that mean things she doesn't know, or rather that simply do not exist in her own language. New words in a new language reveal new sensations, new opinions, new structures, and even new values. So slowly and somewhat painfully, she realizes that, quote, there is no such thing as the right word, unquote. For every language, there is a cluster of secret compartments leading to unknown territories for those who don't speak it, but also, and more strikingly so, for those who learn it. Saudade in Portuguese, awkward in English, je ne sais quoi in French. So many words that unlock different doors in the soul, that can potentially engorge the heart and create new ramifications of existence. The artist realized that expecting words to be precise, logical, equivalent with another word in another language is a futile exercise. Those objects she loved so much, books, did not have an exact correspondence in their Italian equivalent. Her Italian life would be solipsistic and untransmissible. There is no such thing as the right word. Humans were made to speak different languages so as not to come together and be greater than God, the Testament says. Testament is legacy, but it's also a book written in Greek. And what if her children didn't learn the German language? If so, she would remain locked inside her own heart, a side of her that they would never understand. She would not be whole. This is the experience of the immigrant. There is a past that is dislocated, and its place is no longer accessible as life, only as intermittent experience at best. That's why books are so important. They contain a whole world inside them. But, the woman discovered, they could never be wholly transposed onto another place. The books were as much place as her home country and her language. Their pages carried a past that would be only hers and not understood by her new people. And what is understanding? Is it dependent upon communication? Is it the message, the messenger, or the air molecules pushed so as to make a sound which becomes a word? Or the paper gathered in a rectangular shape and forming a book, where each page forms this strange layered object filled with words? And what if you don't understand the words? Perhaps if the words are released of their function, one really starts listening to the page, feeling its gentle touch, and connecting with its matter as a complex material and as a subtle machine, a medium. Meanwhile, in 1964, Marshall McLuhan was publishing a text marking a new turn in the modern world by stating that the medium is the message. Using the example of electricity, he explained what the medium was. He was talking about the substratum, the surface, the thing that materializes images and texts, that renders visible, audible, constant even. The medium is, he said, what causes the message to happen. So messages do not exist in limbo, waiting to be caught by a mediator, a device. Think of electricity as medium, McLuhan exemplified. Quote, whether the light is being used for brain surgery or night baseball is a matter of indifference. It could be argued that these activities are in some way the content of the electric light, since they could not exist without the electric light. This fact merely underlines the point that the medium is the message, because it is the medium that shapes and controls the scale and form of human association and action. Unquote. 20 years later, in 1986, Ursula K. Le Guin would publish a text titled The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, where she speculated, inspired by the feminist anthropology theorist Elizabeth Fisher, that humans spent much more time carrying things than killing animals and making weapons to do so in prehistory. A vessel might be a better characterization of the medium because it nuances the relationships within communication, the solidarity between the carried, the carrier, the carrying act, the sender, and the recipient, but also the intentions behind each communication and the expectations. Perhaps the medium is not the message then. This famous saying, as seductive as it is, simplifies a more nuanced relationship between the writer, the page, the text, and the reader. If we think of Le Guin, we can imagine prehistoric times like she did in her text, and contemplate hands meticulously and masterfully interlacing strands of mulberry tree fibre, having fun with it, creating, discovering a material. But woven together, these strands make a carrier or a bag. Together, these strands allowed one to carry things. Once the things were deposited in the hut, apples for example, no one would think of eating the carrier or the bag. One would eat the apples. One would eat the message. However, because the apples could be carried, ideas of stocking and fermenting flourished. Without the carrying, they would not have been possible. The medium affects reality, behaviors. So the medium is a vessel that is not neutral. It has a material and a history, but mostly it bears possibility. The medium is technology, in the sense that it is a spark of invention through play. Once used to carry things, sign-based messages or apples, it sparks novelty. But more importantly, Le Guin chose to focus on the carrier because it tells a different story and points to different characters. Rather than a story of violence, it recounts a story of patience, caring, and invention. In a sense, this is what McLuhan was saying as well, that we fail to recognize the carriers, the mediums, the vessels, the technologies that shape our messages and therefore our worlds. In the words of Donna Haraway, it matters what matters we use to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots not knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories. Going back to the 60s. In 1969, Onkawara would create a medium message-based work. The sentence, "I'm still alive," on a telegram. Basically, the telegram itself, regardless of text, told all of Onkawara's friends that he was alive there and then, in that time and place, marking in time and place with a photo or any recorded gesture is an existential proof. The sentence, "I'm still alive," is what we call a tautology in logic, a pleonasm in rhetoric, and a good or a bad joke, depending upon your sense of humor, in day-to-day life. It points to the ultimate medium, the living, breathing body. In the 60s, bureaucracy still involved paper, and paper was thus eloquent. Around that time, Irma Blank, the German artist in Sicily, started drawing on her journal, or writing in her drawings, whatever one prefers. She started the series Eigenschriften, which she went on to produce until she moved to Milan in the 1970s. She developed different asemic calligraphies, that is, different calligraphies without words. When I asked Rosanna, her daughter, what memories she had of her mum then, she shared a funny recollection with me. One day she was excited to go back home and tell her mother something that had happened at school. Whatever happened at school, she forgot. What she can recall is her mother asking her, with a hand gesture, to wait until she had finished writing. Rosanna looked at her mother's paper, and it was indeed a writing, but without words. There were lines and lines of the same calligraphic effort, but there were no words to speak of. It was a flow of wordless and yet cohesively handwritten lines. What might have crossed the child's mind? The static snow at the end of TV broadcasting back in the day? Listening to the paper is not a given. One can argue that the drawing, these writings for oneself, Eigenschriften, are the meeting point between the paper, the pastels, and the personal memory of writing and reading, of shedding the love of words, the love of the beautiful phrase, the enchanting sound of verses rhyming, the love for literature. Like Onkawara, Blank had gone through a traumatic war as a child, as an inheritance of a generation before her. Like him, she chose another language to live in. Onkawara was Japanese and moved to New York in 1965, and focused on the medium. the conventions of time for him, the shape of the book for her, as a tool that had to be deconstructed. My work is a book whose pages are scattered and cannot come back together again, she told us. When she moved to Milan, paper met information and civilization, the outer world. She started placing a fine tracing paper on everything she read and transcribed it painstakingly. She covered words with the drawing material, which extracted, as it were, the shape, the system, the structure of organized information. This series is called trascrizioni, transcription. But it's more than that. The paper became a transitional device, from a verbal sign to an index, one of those signs that exist because the material that reveals them is affected by the sign itself, a footprint, an analog photograph, a shiver. The words became marks, which is to say, an encounter between two bodies. She also made books with the same calligraphy over the real books she read, but she also deconstructed newspapers. In an effort of producing real communication, she placed her trascrizioni works on newspaper kiosks and over ads in the street. Paradoxically, listening to the paper was silencing the page. She looked for silence, the true form of communication, where energy, love, concentration, focus sits. With Blank, paper is the language of audible silence. In the bookshop in Milano, Blank read one of her trascrizioni books, her mouth closed, her lips unmoving, humming. I say this is a paradox because it was at this time that she realized, while sitting alone in her kitchen, that the paper being drawn on produced a sound. It seemed to speak its own language of receptacle or container, of medium. The medium was not hiding anymore. It became loud so as to celebrate contact, rather than the personal experience of reading this or that book, rather than personal preference. Irma never said what books she transcribed. As much as I insisted, she resisted. We never knew. She produced her own books, spaces of silence, where words disappeared to make space for the cellulose, the ink, the folds, the pages like little screens, the book as the first mobile phone, the first metaverse, the reality of the infinite folds of imagination. After she'd lost her husband, Blank took to making thick lines over some of his mathematical books. By a process of osmosis, the magical formula of love, which is a form of loss, the page was now the absent body, the place of a new form of silence. Through a process of crossing out and making thick lines, she journeyed to deep blue and to a correspondence between her soul, that is, her breath, and the line. Breathing in, she dipped the brush in the paint. Breathing out, she produced one blue line until there was no more air to exhale. And again, and again, and again. From language to writing, to book, to drawing, to paper, to voice, to line, to breath. The body as a medium, the paper as body. At the turn of the century, as many artists from her generation, Blank saw the information, communication, and data were connected. But her focus was on what communication would become once the world established itself as a global net across the world. Thus, she started a new series called Global Writings, moving away from paper. It seemed that paper, after all, was a personal affair, a diary, a skin, a body. Not unlike the world around her, Blank was glocal, a mixture of local and global. She was a polyglot. She had several worlds layered in her through language. So she devised a new one with 8 consonants, C, D, H, J, L, M, R, and T, and proceeded to produce works with it. She wanted to create a language which would sound completely alien.
Ledirit, hati, hi, ledirt, harhid. لدهيت هالي لدي تي رتديقت هاريديتي تشاليدير رليت ديري رلي هاريتير.
She worked on this series and another previous one on the computer, moving away from paper. She was now using a virtual space that was not mediated by paper. The hands tapped rather than dance on the paper. The material was plastic or polymer rather than cellulose or any other surface reacting like paper to the touch. So, unhappy with this silent and cold body, Blank vigorously went back to the space of the paper, this body and skin she had now discovered as an entity with which to collaborate. So she produced the series Avant-gardes. Avant-gardes were also made in polyester, which is probably here as a sort of hyperpaper, as she was eager to use her whole body, her two hands, grabbing as many biro pens as she could to produce a vibration enacting the sound of its making. Blank is part of a generation of artists who created a simple system based on the philosophy of mark-making as an existential collaboration between signifying bodies. Her path is of a rigorous devotion to silence as communication and paper as its ancient technology, perhaps one of the most minimal of her time. Many moons ago, I was talking to an artist on the phone. I lived in Paris then, and so did this artist. Suddenly, he interrupted the conversation and asked me if there was a thunderstorm in my neighborhood, and how strange that it was so sunny back where he lived. In fact, this was not a meteorological phenomenon. It was my husband drawing. At the time, he took thick, white, large expanses of paper and spent long hours marking it with folds, closing and opening flaps of paper, then folding it again, opening, closing, folding. The paper started to take the shape of a strange container, then a more geometric form, and then, after a considerable amount of time, it became a perfect cube of about 80 centimeters. As soon as the paper had taken this new shape, he placed graphite chunks inside, through one of the edges. As soon as these grey and greasy bits of matter were trapped inside, he would apply pH-neutral tape on all edges of the cube and proceed to shake it. The cube would go up and down, left and right, or more elegantly in circles. The graphite chunks were painstakingly moved around so as to touch the paper. While holding this enormous cube, he imagined the trajectory of the graphite bits and tried to control the remains of their bodies becoming traces on the paper. The graphite bits were now graphite beads. The movement of the cube scrubbed the matter away from all sides, turning them into spheres, little planets, moving about in a sort of mark-making Big Bang. This operation was noisy, first the paper being folded and unfolded, then, after a while, the heavy breathing of his body kneeling, crouching, grabbing, folding, trying to collaborate with the paper, and the paper finally yielding to the extent of its properties. Then came the sound part of the process, the shaking and rubbing of the graphite on the internal side of the paper cube. It was a roaring sound that made me think of 1,000 Tibetan Buddhist prayer wheels, but also of the explosive discharge of heat after lightning in a storm. "No one talks about the sound of drawing," he once told me, echoing what was going on in my mind and foreshadowing this day, the 16th of April, 2025, in my own house, in my studio, where we're both around in a house, representing somehow the ancient avant-gardist, objective, symbolic, political, sustainable, social, and literal language of paper. This episode was recorded on the 16th of April 2025. 2 years and 2 days after Irma's passing. For this episode, I've had the assistance of the Artists Gallery in Bologna, Italy, P420. A big thanks to Alessandro, Fabrizio, Chiara and Vania for their attention to detail, not only for this episode, but also for the exhibitions, the visits to Irma's house. And finally, a huge thank you to Irma's children, namely the relentless Rosanna, who unveiled so many things about her mother's practice and supported her work at a late stage of her life, managing the visits to the studio and the work. The music of the episode is by Sartan and the text was written by me. It's an excerpt of a lecture given on the 3rd of February 2025 at ABK Stuttgart, whose title was The Paper is Impatient, under the invitation of the drawing department and their teachers Katrin Ströbel and Hannah Hennenkamper. The sounds were recordings of Irma's works, so the sounds of the making of Irma Blank's Eigenschriften, radical writings, Avantesto, hypertext, and Hartschleer. If you're here, you're probably enjoying the episode, so if you think someone else might enjoy it too, by all means, share it. Don't forget to rate and follow Exhibitionistas. It seems trivial, but it can make a difference. All kinds of support count and contribute to more investigation and better episodes. So of course, donations and memberships through our website or on Substack are very welcome. All the links are on the show's notes as per usual. And thank you to all of those who've taken a leap of faith and have become our patrons. From a 5-star review to a substantial donation, Exhibitionistas considers you one of those rare unicorns who support independent journalism. Now something a bit different. I'd also love to start a conversation with you. You can now leave comments on Spotify, which is a great way to know what you want more of, or if you'd like to add something to the topic developed, the artist discussed, or simply if you want to leave a note of appreciation. It's a sad world when only the trolls and the bullies interact with journalists and art critics. Let's feed the AI beast with good stuff. Why not bring positivity, ideas, and especially your own perspective to the digital art village?